And we're live.
Greetings, I'm Dr. Al Freeman, Director of LCMS School of Ministry, and we are blessed today to have Dr. Tracy Salgado with us once again for the third part of our three-part series. And Tracy, thank you once again for joining us. It's great to have you with us, and it's been a great series as we talk about helpful thoughts and ideas for the classroom environment and for students who might be experiencing some challenges in different ways and so on. And today we'll talk about some classroom items with Tracy, and she'll have some great items for us. So thank you again, Tracy, for doing this and for the
Of course.
great thoughts and ideas and wisdom as we join together discussing how to best serve and help our students, right? So let me open us in prayer and I'll turn it over to Tracy. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the wonderful and glorious day. We especially give you thanks as we get to celebrate Easter and give thanks for life everlasting, won through your victory for us all on the cross. And once again, being able to say, He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. What resounding words of joy that we get to share every day in our Lutheran schools and in our ministries throughout as we share those with students and families and one another as well. And we take heart in that, and we take heart in knowing that you have created all things and that we are blessed as individuals with varying talents and gifts and abilities, all of those given to us by you. Help us to utilize those to serve you as best we possibly can and point people to you as well as we spread your gospel message. We give you thanks for tracing her multiple talents and gifts, and especially her willingness to share those with all of us in this setting and any other setting, as well as she is constantly there to help guide and provide for us all. Be with us today during this time and be with us always. In your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Al. Well, thanks for asking me to be here, Al. I really appreciate it. For those of you, I think, well, I know Sandy, Bob, I think you were on one of the other calls before. So good to see you again. Katie, in case you don't know, I'm Dr. Tracy Salgado, and I'm with, hey, Bob, yeah, I've seen you before. I'm with the Lutheran Special Education Ministries, and I am the Director of Special Education for LSEM. Today, from what I understand, we're talking about behaviors in the classroom, correct? Yeah. So behaviors, I'm going to start off by saying when a child has a behavior, it's always a form of communication. So it's not probably socially acceptable, but that child is trying to tell you something. And the trick is to figure out what are they saying, because their words and their actions probably are not matching what they're really trying, what's really going on in their head. So behaviors can range from just sitting and doing nothing, absolutely no response, and just refusal to do anything, something nice and quiet, all the way to throwing desks, throwing chairs, stabbing, hitting, kicking, punching, all of it. I mean, it's a huge spectrum of ways to hate. I've experienced all of them. I've had a student flip over those big old-fashioned metal teacher desks back in the day. I had one of those. I had my computer on it back when we didn't really use laptops. It was all desktops and everything. And he flipped the entire thing over. He was angry because I was asking him to sit down and open his book so we could continue reading. He did not want to do that. I've had a student hold me up against a blackboard by my throat and screaming at me. So, and I've also had kids just sit there and do nothing. And when you talk to them and, what's going on, buddy? What do you need? There's zero response. They just sit there and they do nothing. Those kids, I think, are the hardest to deal with because they're not responding. You can't get anything out of them. You just have to wait. You have to just let them sit there, and when they're ready to talk or ready to do, they'll do it. It's their time. You can't force anything out of them. Kids who have the behaviors that are out there and you can see it and they're talking with you, at least there's some sort of communication and you can get some information from them. But again, it's not usually what they're saying is what they're saying isn't usually what they're meaning. Um, being called names or being yelled at, sworn at, something like that. That's usually a communication of I'm frustrated, I'm angry, and it's usually not at you, or it's at a situation or something that's going on at home or with friends or inside themselves. In the case of the student who flipped the desk, he was angry because the book that we were reading was one, he wasn't interesting to him, which shocked me. I chose it for him. It was a very adventurous book about a boy in Alaska, and it wasn't interesting to him. And he found the words too difficult. So he felt challenged in a way that wasn't productive. So he was angry. So he flipped my desk. So we have to go beyond the words and the actions to really try to listen. If the words are negative and spitting and harsh and sharp words, oftentimes it's something they're angry or upset about something else, not what's happening right then and there. And then you've got kids who are quiet and they don't do anything. Those are the harder kids to worry about, to work with. What's going on in their heads? Where is this coming from? Why have they completely shut down? What's happening? So, one of the ways that behaviors can be figured out is to one, really get to know your students, really make sure that you've got a good relationship with them and you're understanding all parts of their lives, the holistic child, what's happening at home, which can be kind of hard. Not all families are willing to let a teacher or administrator in. Maybe there's something going on at home that a family is embarrassed about or doesn't want outsiders to know about. In the case with the child who shut down, all the kids who shut down, I was working in a high poverty school, and a lot of times those kids would shut down because they were hungry or they didn't sleep or something happened at home the night before that they were embarrassed about. And families didn't want a teacher to know that because are they going to report us to social services? Are they going to all of a sudden, suggest that we go to the food bank and we don't want that help? There's all kinds of feelings that go in with, I don't want outsiders to know what's happening in my home. That can be okay. There can be a sense of pride and that's okay. But if there's something else going on at home, abuse or neglect or something, then of course, as mandated reporters, we need to, if we find that information out, we have to report it to the authorities, which can open up a whole new can of worms. But figuring out why children are shutting down and not doing anything, trying to understand what's happening at home is one aspect of it, but also what's happening with their friends at school. Sometimes you'll find that kids are the kids at school, their so-called friends, their classmates, tease them because of what's happening at home or because they're not like other kids. So that can cause a child to shut down. Nobody wants to talk in front of somebody if they're going to be teased later and be told, oh, you're stupid, or you don't know, or that was dumb, or whatever kids say to each other. So they just don't say anything at all. It's safer that way. They don't risk being called out for any reason. And then what's going on in the classroom? Is the child shutting down because what's happening in the classroom is too overwhelming? Maybe there's a sensory component and it's too loud, it's too bright, it's too hot, it's too cold. The seat's not comfortable, the pen's not right, the pencil's not right. I don't have a notebook, what's happening in the classroom, or is it even the academic part of things? What's going on academically? Is the child struggling somewhere? Or on the opposite end, are they bored because it's too easy? Oftentimes that aspect gets overlooked, and a child that's shutting down or struggling, sometimes they can act out too when things are too easy. My daughter did that. She was gifted and we accelerated her through school. She finished almost 2 years in advance, but during her middle school years, we put her in what we thought was an advanced program, but it wasn't advanced enough for her. So my daughter, who's a total angel, she never, ever, ever gets in trouble. She got in trouble at school. She hacked the school's computer system. She They gave all the kids in this program, they gave all the kids laptops, and she was sitting there looking like she was working, but in reality, she hacked the computer system into the, oh my gosh. I was mortified because I worked for the school district, and here's, oh my gosh. I was like, how about we not give her the laptop? But no, we talked to her and she was bored. So instead of hacking the computer system, she'd come home with her nails painted or her hair, it's like, no, we've got to find something for her to do. So it's figuring out what's going on with that student. Hopefully they're not hacking into your systems. I hope you have some good firewalls so a seventh grader can't get in. But we've got to talk to the kid as much as we can. Oftentimes, students are not willing to talk to adults. So then we've got to kind of put on our spy hat, our detective hat, and kind of listen in on those conversations they're having with their peers and seeing if we can pick things up that way. Um, I always told my students that while this is your classroom, it's also my classroom. And so I have eyes in the back of my head and I have ears in the back of my head. I can see and hear everything. And we've got to use those spidey senses that we have. We have to use those skills that we've developed as adults to really try to see a situation um, for what's really happening in it rather than what the student might be reporting back to us. Really listening to see what's going on in those classrooms, out at recess, at lunchtime. Lunch duty can be a real benefit if you're walking around and hearing some of those conversations that are happening between the kids. You can kind of put two and two together and figure out what's happening with a student. But at the end of the day, behavior is always some sort of communication. It's just trying to peel away all the layers into why is this behavior happening. Um, and then you've got kids too who have neurodivergent behaviors. So like autism, oppositional defiant disorder, anxiety, depression, all of those, their brains are different, so they're going to behave differently. And that come when you're working with those kind of students, the understanding comes from a different perspective. It has to come from I understand autism. I understand ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. That's what ODD is. I understand autism, understand anxiety, depression, and then really focusing in on what's going on with that student within their diagnosis, their disability, and working with them there. But going back to autism is a huge spectrum too. So you've got kids on the higher end with maybe Asperger's or sensory processing disorder, and they've got behaviors around that, all the way to kids who are probably in our schools, um, maybe nonverbal in certain situations, or they just think differently. They understand and process the world differently. So what seems average and everyday to us when we're not autistic is weird or different from them. They can't quite move on and they approach it and they perceive it differently. So to try to wrap your head around how they might see something is a challenge for us, but it's something to consider when you're working with a kid with autism, that they're not bringing in the information the same way. I shouldn't say bringing it in. They bring it in, they just process it differently. A real typical example is euphemism. So we say, "Oh my gosh, it's raining cats and dogs outside," or "Christmas is just around the corner. Is everybody excited?" Using those, oh no, they're not euphemisms. What are those called when you um, it's raining cats and dogs. What is that? Idioms, right? Idioms? Yeah, thanks. When you use language with idioms, kids with autism often take that as they don't understand that an idiom means something. It's not actually raining cats and dogs, and Christmas is not around that corner right there. That we mean something differently, and but they don't understand that, and they process it, and they'll look outside to see the cats and the dogs that are coming down from the sky. They'll go over to the corner and look for Christmas. So it's they just process it different. They take it in, but they hear it differently. So It's always a form of communication, and it's our job to figure out what that communication is. Now, when dealing with the behaviors, there's a lot of different behavior programs out there. There's PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Support Systems. There's Love and Logic. There's Zones of Regulation. And then you've got commercial products like Frenzy and for the middle school years, what's that one that they just put out at Concordia? Um, um, oh, Al, do you know which one I'm talking about?
No, I'm trying
Concordia.
to think of what it might be. Bob
Yes,
might know.
something resilient minds
Oh
or
yeah, Resilient Minds. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks, Bob.
yeah.
That's for middle school and higher. Um, but they are working on an elementary version of it. Um, so you've got different options um, for handling behaviors in the classroom. And you know, they all have their pros and they all have their cons, but really what happens is it, you just have to be listening to your students. You have to be paying hyper attention and getting to know your students. PBIS, positive support systems, um, that was mandated in a school that I had worked in. And at first it all sounded really great and good, because you're looking at kids, what they're going above and beyond. Some teachers kind of take it they understand it in a less productive way. They think, oh, I have to give a reward for a kid to show up to school, or I have to give them rewards for doing their homework. I have to give them a reward for sitting down when they're supposed to. We're not in PBIS, the design wasn't meant to give rewards to everyday average kids for doing what was expected. It was providing rewards and supports for kids who are struggling to meet those everyday average expectations, and to let them know that, all right, you're on track, you're doing what you're supposed to do, here's your reward. But because other kids see that child getting rewarded for sitting down in their desk and doing what they're supposed to do when everybody else is doing that because that's what you do in school, other kids saw that and they said, well, where's my reward? I'm doing it too. So with PBIS, you have to be careful that you're not giving away what's going on with that student, because there's a level of confidentiality when kids have a disability, either perceived or diagnosed, and making sure that other kids understand we're not all the same. So sometimes, you know, Billy might get something that you don't, or, you know, I might give Billy some feedback that you're not getting because you're doing what you're supposed to do. So you're doing a good job, but Billy needs a little extra support with it. So when I was implementing it in my classroom, I was always very sure to talk to my students. My whole class, we're all different. We all have different needs. Somebody might need something that you don't need, but you might need something that that other person doesn't need. So addressing the elephant in the classroom is what I called it, is so important. Pointing out that we are not all the same. Not everyone has long blonde hair. Bob's got shorter grayish hair, right? Sorry, Bob. You know, yes, he's a man, but he could have long hair. Sandy, Katie, your cameras aren't on. We're not all the same, is my point. And that goes to not only our external, but also how we perceive things, how we understand things, how we react to things, what we think of things. So what's going on inside of us is also very different. And some people might need something different than other people. And once kids, you know, once you say that out loud and you acknowledge it, it really can change the environment of your classroom. And you have to keep repeating it. That's okay that Billy gets this and you don't. Remember, you got this other thing the other day and Billy didn't get that. We're all different. Remember, not everyone's the same. Really keeping that a normal part of conversation, a normal part of day, can really help kids understand everyone has different needs. Um, going back to PBIS, one of the components of PBIS is a public chart, where kids are being placed, oh, you're doing good, so you're in the green, or you're in the you're kind of on the edge, so you're in the yellow, or oh, you're doing really excellent, going way above and beyond, so we're going to put you in the purple section, or you're having a really bad day, we're going to put you down in red. I encourage you strongly to never, ever, ever use public behavior reports in the classroom or in the school building. Nobody likes to have their behavior pointed out in front of other people. I mean, think of yourselves as adults. Do you want your boss coming in to your staff meeting and saying, listen, Katie, I don't like the way you're pacing in the back of the room during this meeting. I need you to sit down and be quiet. Stop writing notes. Stop texting on your phone, Katie. I'm going to take that away from. Nobody likes that. Nobody likes to be called out. So don't students as well. For kids, that that negative feedback in front of their peers affects them so much more than as adults. As adults, we've built some resilience, some of those that tough skin. We know how to deal with it because we're emotionally mature. With children, when they're spotlighted for a negative behavior, it pulls them down and you're going to get more negative behaviors. It also makes them feel less than their peers, and children in their school age career, their peers are everything. So we have to be careful how we're addressing the behaviors in front of peers as well. Yes, there are times where maybe something is dangerous or imminent, or it has to be handled right then and there, and you need to say stop. But that's a different situation, and that all goes back to our professionalism and what we know to be best for everybody in the room. You know, of course, we have to sometimes call out a kid for their behavior because it could hurt themselves or hurt somebody else like immediately. But generally speaking, calling out behaviors, um, it's I wouldn't recommend it. I think you would end up with actually, I don't think I know, research shows you end up with more behaviors further down the line because you've made them feel worse than what they already did feel. And he probably did it inadvertently because, we just have to get through our day, and things happen fast, things happen furious in the course of a school day, in a classroom, in a school building. Kids are passing in the hallways, and you've got a couple boys that are playfully shoving each other. But as you know, they're playfully shoving, they're still, showing a behavior. The behavior is positive, they're playing and they're getting along, but that behavior could potentially hurt somebody else if one of the boys shoves another one and they lose their balance and they fall into maybe one of the little kids walking by, and then somebody gets hurt. So it's, hey, going up to them, hey guys, you know, let's tone it down a little bit. I love that you're having fun with each other, but we've got little kids passing by, or it's a crowded hallway. Let's not do that right now. Save it for the playground, sort of thing. Um, you know, just being able to talk to kids about their behaviors in the moment, in a quiet manner, so you're not calling them out in front of everybody else. But also remembering that behavior is the child trying to tell you something, and it's your job to take off your teacher hat and put on your detective hat and try to figure out what is going on with that child. What are they trying to say? Now, what questions do you have? Bob, you commented Lloyd Harding Lutheran Special Education in St. Louis taught me fair is what is needed. Yes. What's right is what, how's that go? What's equal is not always fair. What's fair is not always equal. That's right. You guys have seen those pictures of the kids standing on the boxes at the fence line trying to see the game on the other side of the fence. Exactly. Being fair is not always equal. Precisely. It's fair to be meeting somebody's individual needs. Great comment, Bob. Yeah, thank you. Equal's not fair, fair is not equal. That's right. That's right. What questions do you have? What scenarios or situations can I help you with, or questions that you have? Yeah.
So one of the things that I've noted is we when we have children with special needs and we're mainstreaming or inclusion or least restrictive environment, we tend to handle that pretty good. But there are times where they're far enough along on the spectrum that we need an extra set of eyes and hands. And what I've kind of found in my 43 years is parents 40 some years ago we're a little more understanding about each unique child. And many parents today are kind of saying, look, I'm paying you to not have disruptive instruction, and so kid is disrupting the classroom.
Mhm.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and as a teacher too, I always thought that too, that this child is interrupting all the other kids in education. It's not fair. But in our Christian schools, we're blessed to be able to say, you're right. It's not fair and it is difficult. And I understand where you're coming from. And I can see where your child might be frustrated. But in our school, number one, we're all created in God's image and we love every child for who they are. And number two, we open our doors to every child because we want to make sure that that child knows that they're loved by God. But then also the how to handle it with that parent. In my experience, I've always said, you're right. Acknowledge them. They're not wrong, right? It is hard. But at the same time, I'm doing the best I can to make sure your child gets the best education they can. And yes, there will be interruptions, whether it's from a behavior from a child or a fire drill or the police car zooming by on the road and all the eyes looking out. What's the siren for? Or the fact that we have a field trip coming up in a couple days, or lunch is an hour away. There are always interruptions. I get that. And I'm doing the best that I can to make sure that your child's education is not being interrupted by this other student. This is how I'm doing it without giving away information, what you're doing with that child. You don't want to, give away confidential information, but this is how we're handling it. When that child, when that other child has an issue, I make sure that your child is safe and I make sure that your child is doing the work they're supposed to do. And um, I try to get on it right away. So to minimize, whatever you're doing in the classroom, that's how I always responded. And it seemed to work. Um, I've never had a parent pull out their kid from my classroom or my school for that matter, um, because of that, that they were so frustrated. But I
Right.
think just hearing them and letting them know that you hear them and how you're handling it can go a really long way.
Mhm.
Tracy, I think that's a great answer, and especially the last part, right? It's always about listening
Hmm.
and making sure that the parent recognizes they're being heard.
Hmm.
And, also the trust factor, that education brings with it a significant trust factor, right?
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
trust that your child is there with a bunch of other children and also adults who are educated in education and working
Hmm.
with the students. And I always think it's part two of in our Lutheran schools, right? This is the whole child approach. So it's also a learning experience for the child that's in the classroom with other kids that are maybe exhibiting behaviors like this. And
Hmm.
it's that Christian aspect of loving our neighbor and
Yeah.
also the recognition of social growth too,
Yeah.
and empathy and
Hmm.
all the soft skills that we talk about that are so needed today.
Yeah.
So in reality, for that parent, it's a learning experience that that child is immersed in that and learning all kinds of social skills and working with people and understanding, compassion, and empathy and communication skills with that as well. So that too is part of the learning environment and the learning experience that will help that child grow and mature and be productive in the future as well in that sense.
You're so right, Al. That's such a huge part of it. I think parents, when they send their children to a private school and they're paying for that, they expect this perfect environment. And
Yeah,
nope,
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no one that's perfect. I mean, you can, um, Richard Schumacher, our senior director of operations, he and I were at the LEA Administrators Conference in
Mhm.
March in LA, right? And we were sitting there at the hotel restaurant having dinner, and we ended up getting a dinner and a show. There was a funny group of people there, so it was pretty entertaining. But also on the side was a young girl who was as we watched her, we figured out she was autistic, but she was having a meltdown. And there was other children in the restaurant too. And this girl, she was really upset and she was very loud, so people were staring at her. And it was really cool to see the parents of these other smaller children saying, she's okay. It sounds scary. They were talking their child through it. But that's real life, like you were saying, Al, that we have to learn these soft skills because we're never going to have a perfect environment. And kids have to know how to deal with this stuff, those soft skills outside and not only in their classroom, but outside in the world. How do you handle someone who's showing some sort of behavior that's a little offsetting or upsetting to somebody? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I had a gentleman that was quite a ways into the spectrum, and
Mhm,
we got him through K through 6 together. And
mhm,
what I found was, living out the eighth commandment, help and befriend, speak
Mhm.
well of, put the best construction on everything. Uh, it was interesting that as the years went by, the students that moved grade to grade with Matthew, I mean, they became his best friends, fiercest protectors. If we were going to a pep rally, we knew the noise was going to trigger Matthew, and we would have kids volunteer. I'll go in with Matthew, I'll help him. And then we had, exit plans in place, and kids would volunteer to exit with Matthew. So he wasn't alone, and
wow.
they're missing the pep rally.
Yeah,
But they were okay with that because
yeah.
they valued that relationship with Matthew. And I think that whole class benefited from that, and from his inclusion. And
Mhm.
he had a twin sister, and here was interesting working with the parents. His sister also had a tremendous calming effect on him,
Mm.
but we intentionally decided after kindergarten, I had two classrooms at each grade level. We always put the sister in the other classroom. So in the school day, the sister had a little bit of a break, and Matthew learned to function with others without his sister, but he could see her at lunch and playground and stuff and drop off and pick up.
Feel
But
the
it
same.
gave the sister a chance to blossom as well. And
Yeah.
she wasn't on the spectrum. So, yeah,
Wow. That's a That's a great story.
it
Along
was,
with that, in that regard, um, that those kids became that child's, protector and advocate and all that stuff. If you have a parent that comes to you and says, what's going on? Why is this student and my child's education is being disrupted? I would then make sure that um, I I would take many opportunities to make sure that the child of those parents had plenty of opportunity to interact with the student that was showing some negative behaviors, to get a relationship developed so that child could go home and say, oh, I made friends with, Matthew, and we did this today. So she could, or he could, report back to the parents,
yeah,
and maybe parents would settle down a little bit, kind
absolutely.
of use that as all right, you're going to be friends with this kiddo, so you stop
Hmm.
complaining at home about him,
Yeah,
make it
for
work out for
sure.
everybody. So,
Yep, that's very true. I
yeah.
need to head off to another meeting, but thank you for this series. It's been
Yeah.
Yeah,
very, very helpful. And Al, thanks for putting them on and recording them. We know a
absolutely.
lot
Yeah.
of our teachers that'll use it for CEUs. Can't always, come on live, but
Mhm.
they can go in and do some PD and discussions with their faculty and staff. So thank you.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks, Bob. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
I think part of this too, Tracy, is it's so important to have these discussions in faculty meetings at the beginning of the year and some reminders. I'm just thinking back to my days as a teacher, starting out.
Hmm.
And I had some students in my classroom, and I don't you don't understand it, I don't think, until you start to get into teaching and you get into your classroom and
Yeah.
you need a little permission that it's okay as a teacher, that not everybody's the same. You don't need to treat them all alike and that kind of thing, that you need to know what's best for each student. I had a student, for instance, that just incredibly had high anxiety, and it was the fact that he would show up at school each day was a big thing, and they
Yeah.
sent him to our school because they knew that we could see him as unique child that he was and some of the struggles, and that he would probably have success there, which he did, and
Mhm.
after by the time he got to be a senior, those anxieties were way down. He was accomplishing and all those things, but I had to make sure he had a desk right next to the door, and if he got overwhelmed by that anxiety, he needed to step outside or even go outside and get fresh air for a second. That was okay.
Yeah.
And he could do that, and administration knew he was doing that. It wasn't like, oh, you go chasing after him or what's going on here or some of these things. But that, and there's just different things about different students, and it's good to have those thoughts. And it's also good if you have a student like that. I always think, if they move fourth grade to fifth grade, or for us, they moved from ninth grade to 10th grade, for those teachers to have some of those conversations of what works, what
Mhm.
didn't work, and also have the knowledge that as they grow, that could change.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of touched on something a little bit. As teachers, we are professionals at knowing each student as an individual, right? That we know child development, we know how to read students, we know how to interact with students. That's what we do. And as we move along in our career, we get better and better and better at it because that experience builds up, right? When you have parents, they're concerned about their child, rightfully so. It's their child. They sometimes don't see the whole big picture that not only is it their child in that classroom, but there's all those other kiddos. And as the teacher, your job is to make sure all of those students are working well together and the classroom is flowing. Now, there's a big controversy right now about cameras in classrooms and teachers wearing body cams and things like that. And I hesitate so strongly on that because while on the surface it might seem like a good idea to know what's going on in the classrooms and the behaviors and what's being said and how things are being dealt with, those people, the audience, the people who are going to see that film on those cameras, they don't have that intrinsic knowledge like teachers do. We know students, we know how to get to know each student as an individual, and we know how to respond to that student as an individual, but also as a whole classroom. So it's a gift teachers have, and a lot of people on the outside don't understand the goings on in a classroom. But you also touched on some strategies for kids with behaviors too. So I'd like to just talk about those for a minute. You having an escape route is what we always called them. A desk by the door is a great idea for when students are older. Younger students, you want to be careful because they don't quite know how to separate I need a break versus this is dumb and I don't want to learn this, or I'm bored and there's a fine line between I'm feeling anxious, I need to step away from, as opposed to, I don't want to do this right now. So, but with little ones, you can have a system, you can develop like a nonverbal system when that child needs a break. Maybe it's a thumbs up or it's a thumbs down, like maybe the child sits with their thumbs down and teacher goes, oh, thumb is down. That means they're struggling right now. And the teacher just gives a little nod or gives a little thumbs up. Go ahead and take a break. Then you've already made a plan with that student. What does that break look like? Does it mean going to the bubbler or the water fountain, whatever you call it in your world? I've learned that there's two different words, but going to get a drink of water somewhere. Does it mean stepping down to the office for a minute to get a hug from the secretary or the principal? Does it mean going down to the end of the hallway, touching the door, and coming back to class? Does it mean going in the hallway and skipping for a few minutes or jumping jacks in the hallway, something like that? What does that look like? Always set it up prior to the child leaving. Or does the child need to leave with another adult and making sure that adult knows that that child is coming? One strategy I really love is when a teacher notices that a child needs a break. Maybe the child doesn't quite know it yet, but the teacher is seeing some signs that the child needs a break. The teacher saying to that child, "Hey, I need an errand to be run. Janie, will you please run this note down to the office for me? And just quick scribble on a sticky note. Janie just needed a break, needed her out of the classroom, give her a high five, send her back. Thanks. You don't really need to send a note. You just need to have that child take a break. And so you're sending them down to the office. Or could you deliver this to Mrs. So-and-so down the hall? And let her know, I need to let her know something. And it's just a note to Mrs. So-and-so that the student needed. I love the idea of notes. They're not really messages, unless they could be, that's fine too. But so taking a break is a huge strategy that's used, and it can be used well when it's done right. But there's some details in taking a break that teachers need to work out. So taking a break is a great idea. Another one is to have a quiet space in your classroom. Maybe a student is struggling sitting in their desk. The desk is hard, the desk is uncomfortable, maybe the desk is closed, maybe they're by a vent or a window or a noisy classmate or something where their desk just isn't the right spot for them at that moment because something is going on, and to have a quiet place in the classroom for that student to go to. I always like to have a quiet corner. Sometimes I would have a couch if my classroom was big enough. I'd have a whole couch and they could lay on the couch, sit on the couch. I'd have blankets, pillows, stuffed animals, just whatever they needed. There'd be books. They could look at the books as long as I wasn't teaching. So I always set up the rule at the start of the year, the quiet corner, this is when you can use it at these times. If I was teaching and a student needed a break, they could take the break in the quiet corner, but they still had to listen to what I was teaching. But they could go take that break over there. Now, if I wasn't teaching and there wasn't something going on that the student needed to pay attention to, the student could go back and take their break. But it was always a set time. I had a timer back there, and the students, I taught them how to set the timer, what the expectation was. Also had it posted. When I taught older kids, it was in writing, step by step. When it's younger kids, it was in writing with pictures, so they knew step by step. I also had paper back there with markers and pens and a mirror. So if a student was upset and they needed a break, they could look at their faces, what their face looked like in that emotion in the mirror if they wanted to. They didn't have to. Or they could draw out their feelings or write out their feelings. There was also a box there that they could put that paper in so that I could take it and look at it. Or they could just crumple it up and throw it away. Totally their choice. They were in control of how they were managing their I need a break behaviors and their feelings. Also, we talked a lot about feelings. So not to be afraid to in your classroom to have that also normalized and talked about. Everyone has feelings all day long and they change all day long. And one situation can create different feelings for different people. We talked about that a lot. So verbalizing emotion and feelings and giving names and allowing students to understand that it's sort of like an inherent part of our classroom and teaching that it's not a set time every day. Oh, here's our 15 minutes SEL lesson. That can help too, but also to having a normal conversation throughout the day about that. When kids would get excited in my classrooms, the whole class, oh my gosh, I could see you guys are all so happy. I can feel the excitement, and labeling those feelings for the kids. Yes, it's disappointing. Our recess has to be canceled. It's too cold to go outside. I hear your groans and moans. And yes, it can be boring playing games in the I wish we could go outside too, that empathy part of it, but talking about it. So taking a break, having a quiet corner, talking about feelings and emotions as a normal everyday part of your classroom or your school building, but also having a safe place for the student to go if they need to get out quickly. So working it out with another teacher or an administrator, is there a place that I can send my student when they're really blowing up? And then in that place, they're not coming back with candy or stickers or rewards. They're just sitting quietly after exploding. Um, to give a reward when, yes, you could, talk to the student. I'm glad you recognized that you were exploding, or I'm glad you left the room when Miss Snyder asked you to leave because you were getting upset. Thank you for doing that. But giving a reward sends a different message than just acknowledging that they did a good thing and then letting that child have that emotion and then sending them back to the classroom when that emotion is passed. Then talking about the emotion. To try to talk to a kid when they're upset in that moment is absolutely ridiculous. It does not solve anything. And in most cases, it actually escalates the behavior. I mean, think about yourself. Do you really want your spouse or your child or your coworker saying, "Oh, you're so upset. I can see you're so angry. What's going on? Why are you doing this?" Because I am, because I'm mad, because I'm sad, because I'm frustrated, whatever. No, that doesn't work. You have to come back around and talk about it later on after the child has settled down, after the child has had a moment to be in that behavior, and then come back. Then say, "Hey, Bobby, come on over here. Let's talk about what happened a few minutes ago. I know it's really scary, and I know you probably don't want to, but let's just talk about it for a minute. I promise it's going to take a minute." And to make it very short and make it very clear. I understand you are upset. I'm glad you left the classroom. In the next time this happens, what could we do to make it better? So, and then try to implement those things the next time it happens. So, giving them a place to go when they have a very negative behavior can be not only safe for that student, but then safe for the other students in the classroom. It goes back to Bob's question too. Parents are complaining. When you ask the child to leave and they can go to a safe place, then it makes that classroom feel much safer and makes those children, helps those children know that number one, their feelings will be met and acknowledged, but also number two, that there is a place that those other students who have those explosive or those strongly negative behaviors can go and they can still feel safe in their classroom. So those four are some good ideas. There's a lot of details in there, and each one has to be handled differently, uniquely. But as a big flyover, those are some great interventions to do when students have some behaviors.
Okay, any questions? You got me thinking back to all my teaching days, and especially again early on versus, you learn so much over time. And we had a great program at our school, and the person who led it was just so knowledgeable and so good. And uh, Irene Jaguar, who was just an amazing instructor, not just for the kids, but for the teachers too, because
Mhm.
she would always help us understand and get concepts of how to work with students and how to help them reach their potentials, and just the way that she had, again, not just with the students, but with the teachers as well, as we would grow so much thanks to her mentorship and her knowledge. And I had just a great understanding of better understanding of how to work with students. And you just you never know sometimes what the little item that happens that could impact them, and you have
Mhm.
to be ready for that at all
Mhm.
times.
Mhm.
Even when you're having maybe a bad day, you can't
Yes, it's
you
hard.
it is hard, right? So you kind of have to, have that mindset and prepare for that. And again, this has been outstanding. I thank you again for the whole series. All three of these have been outstanding. But I think it's always so important, just those reminders again for teachers, beginning of the year, some of the end of the year stuff as well, just reflecting back and thinking of, okay, this is what worked well, this is what didn't work well. Let me get ready for next year. The conversation between teachers, amongst teachers as well. And especially if you get a new administrator too, because if you don't communicate some of these things and they're coming in and they might see this go on, their reaction might actually create more harm,
Yeah.
more struggles, maybe instead of harm to a situation. So it's always important to be on the same page there as well, and for that understanding,
Yeah.
because you don't know what you don't know, right? And sometimes we forget those things because we have our own vernacular in every school. We have our own LCMS vernacular, and then you go to the school, there's other things there. And so it's important, and it's important you get new teachers in too. They may have taught for 20 years, but they're coming to your school.
Yep.
They may not be aware of some of these things. They might see a kid leave your classroom and they could be walking down the hallway on a, prep time or something like that. And next thing you know, they engage the child and while you're out of class and things can go awry.
Escalates it.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't forget to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you kind of alluded talking with students too throughout the year about what's going on and reminding them when
Mhm.
they come back from longer breaks or longer weekends, this is how we do things. Remember that, and setting them up for success that way too. But I like the idea, including the new administrators, because often, classrooms and schools are all microcosms of
Mhm.
society. They're all their own individual societies. And so when you come to a new one, you've got to learn how it works. So yeah, that's a good idea. But I want to thank you for
Yeah.
inviting me and trusting us to um, provide this information for all of the teachers and administrators that are watching. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. We are blessed by you and what you do and your willingness to share and help
Yes.
and guide us all. You know, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I think we work very well together, and it's always a blessing when I have the opportunity to learn from you and talk with you and
Same.
engage in whatever way. So, what a great joy and blessing that is. Thank you for your work and your efforts and for your willingness to always be there, whether it be a Zoom series or those that watch this, don't forget, a phone call away too, right? That's
Absolutely.
the great thing about Tracy. It's a great thing about LSEM. You may not
Yeah.
be engaged with their services officially, but as Tracy just said, it's there to help because we want to
Mhm.
see students be successful and we want to see
100%.
teachers and administrators be successful
Yep.
because that just it helps everyone, right? So keep
Yep.
that in mind too. If you ever need connections, feel free to reach out to LCMS School Ministry and we'll provide you that contact information as well.
That's great.
So
Thank you so much, Elle. Thanks for everybody for coming and for those of you who are watching later. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All
Uh,
right.
Blessings to everyone. And that ends the series, but it probably does not end future series because, as Tracy knows, I always ask her for things at some point. So I'm sure there may be more to come as well. Thank
That's
you very
right.
much. Blessings to you.